All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about accounts receivable management. So when managing accounts receivable, um, basically one of the things you have to decide as a business is the credit selection. Who's actually going to get credit? Who are you going to extend credit to? And that's going to ultimately kind of flow from your credit standards. So you get to establish what your credit standards are as a business, and then that dictates what your credit selection is and who actually gets the credit. So let's talk about those credit standards. Basically, those are going to be requirements that a customer must meet in order to obtain credit from you. So if the customer wants to buy from you on account, they have to meet certain standards, and you have to decide what those standards are going to be before you extend the credit to them. So some of the things that might be relevant for those standards, things like credit scoring, right? So it could be you look at their credit score, or you look at their history of prior payments, or any number of things like that. Their consistency with orders, and whether they've always been paying on time, or all these kinds of things. And basically, you can do such a credit score for the financial health of the customer. And from that could then lead into, all right, they've met your credit standards, and now we can extend credit to the customer. Now, when you start changing those credit standards, then that can actually kind of trigger some advantages and disadvantages. And really, those advantages and disadvantages really kind of apply to just extending credit, period. So let's kind of talk about that. If I extend credit to my customers, a few things are going to happen. One, I'm probably going to sell more product, because if I extend credit to them, more customers are more willing to hit that buy button and actually buy it if they have a few days to pay than if they had to put cash right up front. So I'm probably going to increase my sales a bit, particularly if in my industry it's the norm for people for suppliers to provide credit. So if it's the norm for suppliers to provide credit, and the customers are therefore expecting me to extend credit, if I don't provide credit, I'm probably going to have a little bit of a harder time from a competitive standpoint actually selling product when all my competitors are willing to give the customers a few days to pay. So from that standpoint, probably I'm going to have better sales by extending credit. Disadvantages. First off, I'm going to get paid later. So there's going to be a delay between when I sell a product, when I actually get paid. And from a time value of money standpoint, those dollars that I get, 30 days later, 60 days later, whenever, they're worth a little bit less. So that's kind of worth noting. So I'm going to get paid later. So I delay when I get paid, which then means I have to have more money on hand to keep my business running while I wait to get paid. So that's going to be a disadvantage. There's also a bigger picture disadvantage here, and that is if I extend credit to somebody sooner or later is not going to pay. And it's just basically a fact of business that if I start extending credit, I'm going to wind up dealing with somebody who doesn't wind up paying. And in fact, that's why generally accepted accounting principles require that if you are extending credit, you're going to have an estimate of that. And so basically you're going to have an allowance for doubtful accounts, and ultimately you're going to have to expense the what you think are going to be the bad debts, et cetera. So you actually have to account for the fact if I'm selling on account, somebody's not going to pay me, right? Now, side note, if you knew they weren't going to pay in advance, you would never have extended credit, right? So the idea is you have credit standards to try to make the likelihood of a customer not pay be manageable and reasonable, but you don't actually know in advance who's not going to pay. If you did, you just wouldn't have sold on account. So we've got advantages and disadvantages. Now, if I lower my standards, and so I relax it, make it easier for customers to obtain credit from me, well, the advantages and disadvantages pop in. Well, again, I'm probably going to get more sales. That's an advantage. But I'm going to get paid later, and possibly there's a higher chance that more customers don't pay at all. And so I have to weigh, will I make enough from the additional sales to compensate for the higher proportion of people who don't pay? And so when you look at that, you can actually do a capital budgeting style of analysis on that and say, what would be my incremental increase in sales, incremental increase in costs? What would they be, including the costs associated with the bad debts associated with this proposed change, given what we think would play out? And then you can figure out, does it look like this change would have a positive net present value for the business? And if it looks like it'd be positive, okay, maybe I ought to relax those credit standards. On the other hand, if it looks negative, maybe not. Maybe I ought to evaluate a strengthening my credit standards, requiring higher standards, and see what that would look like, and explore that. Now, when you are extending credit as a business, you do get to set the credit terms. So you're going to be able to set things like an early payment discount period. So you could tell your customer, hey, if you pay within a certain number of days, you can take a discount. You can pay a little bit less. You can also then specify, all right, and basically, but overall though, you got to pay within a certain length of time. So if you pay within a certain number of days, you can take a discount, but at the end of the day, you have to pay within the specified credit period. So you get to set that too. How long do they have to pay to get a discount? When do they have to pay total, and so forth. And that's where you get the credit terms kind of like relatively standard. You've seen maybe in different accounting scenarios or whatnot, like a 210 net 30. What that means is if the customer pays within 10 days, they get a 2% discount. But in any case, the net amount is due within 30. So you have to pay within 30, but if you pay within 10, you can take a discount. So basically the idea there is when you're extending those credit terms, that discount is designed to incentivize the person who's taking the credit to pay early, basically, and to pay within that 10-day period. And in a subsequent video, I'll discuss kind of just how much of an incentive that really is. Now, basically, when you're looking at those credit terms, as you set those different credit terms, what you're really kind of affecting is what that average collection period is going to look like for your business. If I give my customers 180 days to pay, well, guess what? Some of them are going to wait a whole bunch of days to pay, and my average collection period is going to go way, way, way up if I'd previously given them a lot less time. So when you're thinking about what kind of credit terms you're creating, that is ultimately going to affect things like that average collection period, which, if you go back to a prior video, that would then lengthen the cash conversion cycle if I gave them more time to pay. So if I give them more time to pay, average collection period goes up, cash conversion cycle gets longer. My money is going to be wrapped up in receivables for a longer period of time, which means that I'm going to have to invest more money in that, which is less efficient. So I have to kind of weigh, do I get enough sales due to the increased length of time I'm giving the customers to make it pay off in terms of being more profitable overall. Now, as a sort of a process note here, if you start selling an account, one of the things you're going to wind up tracking is aging schedules. In other words, you got to track how old the receivables are. And the older the receivable is, the reality is the less likely the people are to actually pay. So if you gave people 30 days to pay and you've got some that are sitting out there at 60, 70, 80 days, the further out that's getting is way past when they were supposed to pay. I mean, the further out it gets, the less likely it is that this is going to be collected. And at some point, that's when you have to kind of write that off as bad debt expense and say, hey, we're just not going to collect on this. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to stop. It just means you're recognizing from an accounting standpoint, highly unlikely we're going to get paid for this at this point. Okay. Hopefully this little video about accounts receivable management has been helpful and kind of the advantages and disadvantages of selling on account and some of the factors that kind of play into that. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.